Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back.
Morning.
Good
everyone.
morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
Doing well.
Feel great.
This
Well,
is a
next section.
next intro section. Moving on. I was just going to say this is a pre-recorded episode, so this is one that we've recorded. We have individuals traveling. It's summertime. People gotta move. So we're doing a couple pre-recordings here for the audience. So just FYI, we will probably not be live in the chat window, but we'll still try to make this a good, lively episode as well.
I mean, we're at the last, 50 days before school starts. So we're all getting our vacations and we all got the stuff. Yeah. We're close. When does school start for you guys? August 20th for us in Chicago.
We're a little bit later here in Wisconsin. We start on September 1st, I think is when we start.
Okay.
I believe that's because, we get really good weather. I mean, we get cold weather in the winter, but they try to extend our summer as long as possible, and it really gets warm towards the end of August and September, into September even a little bit there. So I think they try to extend the season as long as possible.
Listen, we see your guys' advertising. It's everywhere.
Yeah, come to the Dells.
Yeah.
Come to Wisconsin Dells. It's still open.
Do you get a lot of Lake Geneva stuff too?
No, it's Doris County, sister. They have all the money apparently for advertising. Door County. So yeah,
come get the Door County cherries.
Yeah,
it is.
Yes, that's a big one.
They are good.
They are good. So
tasty.
That being said, let's jump into some. Our main topic today will be a mailbag. So we have a great mailbag topic coming. And today we have a longtime listener who has a great question. It's going to be quite elaborate. So talking a little bit more around what the CoE does, how to better engage your leadership inside your center of excellence. I think this will be a very interesting topic. Honestly, I think this is probably more common than we think. I think this is happening more often than most people would like to acknowledge. So that being said, let's do a quick little beat from the street here. Tommy, you've got something, a little topic around the center of excellence.
Yeah, we're closer to the adoption side of things. And it's funny when we go through all the documentation and the roadmaps, and I think all of our examples, it's like, well, they were using Excel and we showed them Power BI and everyone was wowed. However, I'm finding a situation where that doesn't always happen. And this is pretty relevant. Again, it is happening where you have these archaic processes and archaic tools, showing them Power BI, showing them an easier way. However, they've been using these processes for so long, and not just the last 2 years. We're talking years, and the same people in those situations, not new people with this tools. Why are we using this tool? Maybe even the people who bought the tool in the first place or were responsible for getting that tool, who are dead set holding on and not willing to let go of I get that, but we can't change this because there's 100 things that in the past that would also have to be affected, all the dependencies on this archaic process. And I think to me, this is showing one of those where just because you can show the wow or the demo doesn't mean that everyone's going to be on board, or more importantly, the right people are going to be on board. And I want to get your guys' opinion. How much do you see that? And even just now, I think we'll see this with Fabric, but how much are you seeing this with your tooling or your other clients or other departments?
This is a great question. So I'm gonna take your question. I'm gonna slightly maybe modify it to what I've seen as well. So I'm gonna keep the vein here of there are old things in existing processes inside your company that potentially need to be updated. In general, like when new tooling shows up, I think there's two ways you can approach it. You can conform the new tooling exactly to your old process, or you can kind of take your process and relook at it and saying, in lieu of the new tool, how should I adopt my process so that the new tool can be used in the same fashion?
Right.
Maybe the general availability is the same, but the data and how you process it might be different. I feel like there's a lot of things in companies that have just been built and established, and they're just processes that people have built, and moving them into Fabric, particularly maybe the semantic model and the Power BI side, is kind of a new world for people. They haven't really been able to think about sharing data, like sharing the semantic model as the key element. Usually it's been around, I'm building this information, I'm doing the data engineering as a person, and then I'm sharing out the Excel file or those other documents, PowerPoints, whatever those things are. So there's a lot of things here that I think are you're just kind of fighting against culture because there's a ingrained data culture of how we do things. What I will say with this though is I also feel like any of these data engineering activities that happen kind of behind the scenes, semantic models and reports are pretty visible. You can very quickly see that there's actually something being produced and developed. When you look at backend processes or these archaic systems and like archaic processes, they just kind of happen. Whether they're right or wrong, I don't know. Whether they work every single time, I don't know. But they've just been working behind the scenes. And so I think there's this assumption that, if Power BI shows up and I'm going to take a 10-year Excel document that we've been building the last 10 years, and we're going to be able to, in a week, turn it over to Power BI. And on one hand, I'm like, yes, we can do it faster than it took you 10 years to develop the process, but you need to give us some time. And there's this kind of, it's not a black hole, I would say, but there is this element of when you look at how much time you've taken to build the solution, and then you compare, okay, I had to unbuild that and rebuild it in a new tool. There's a lot of effort spent documenting, learning, figuring out what the old thing was doing, figure out all the edge cases. Okay, you designed this part here to clean this data because of this XYZ reason. Okay, I have to repeat that same cleaning process in the new process. Like there's all these things, and you have to be patient. There has to be some, like, you can't just expect all that stuff just to turn over. And when you start working on back end things, it's much harder to communicate progress, is maybe where I'm trying to go.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of words to say. It's hard to communicate progress in the back end of things because you have to learn what the process was and go figure out how to rebuild it again in a sustainable way.
Yeah. I think, yes, I've seen this before. Yes, you have individuals that are doing that. I guess what some of the relevant questions or statements that come to mind when going through those is, the first question is, are you presenting a new technology to them and the value's not there, right? Like, does the value of the change outweigh the burden of moving to something new? Because that there is a, like, on a high level, it's gotta deliver something way better than the current solution. Does the business want to change something that already works? Right? Do the resources want to learn?
Right.
Like, those are the things that, like, okay, what does the business do? Well, if they've been here for 20 years and they know the business in and out, it's not like they're going to get rid of the person because they don't want to learn a new thing, right? So what are they going to stick with? So
good point.
So all of those, like, a lot of those are the pushbacks to saying, like, we don't want to move forward with, like, the newer stuff. In those areas, I think it's really important to lean into risk reward, right? So what are the risks with existing, sticking with the existing system? What are the rewards for that? And then do the same thing with the next gen of whatever you're trying to push them into, because that takes it out of, like, the technology only conversation. And it's like, listen, here's what we're thinking about future state, right? Your risks of this stuff being deprecated, it's not in the cloud, it's gonna, like, it could blah blah blah, whatever they are. And then hopefully what you're presenting in terms of, like, going to Fabric or some other next gen solution is you're setting them up for the future. Well, if AI is part of the conversation, maybe that's a driver, right? I don't know. But it's also a caution for technologists, I think, in that just because it's a flashy, cool new thing doesn't mean that an organization wants to adopt it because it's a flashy, cool new thing. You need to bring the value to the business. So all in all, I think pushbacks like this require a much stronger reward list.
Yeah.
Because there's probably harder conversations, whether that's in time and effort, because with ingrained processes, there's a lot of dependencies that do, like, ripple through. And sometimes those answers are just no.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I consulted with a few companies where it was just like, man, that tail is so long and there's so many areas of departmental engagement that's a major change. So drives to, like, change those things, you don't start there. Like, it's kind of great. Let's focus on these other areas. Let's show a lot of value. And then over time, if that's something you also want to roll into, we'll tackle that at the time. But it's not like, it's kind of like building up the data culture. I mean, it kind of fits in there, but it's like, if Power BI and Fabric and all these things are brand new to an organization, you don't pick your hardest thing and you say, we're doing this. You start and show you the value, and then you gain excitement. And I think that's a much better path towards success.
And that's very similar to actually how we've approached this. We've kind of taken two approaches here. One, a word that comes up all the time when we talk about adoption is the empathy, because a lot of times we realize too, it's not just the technology. Again, the other big part of this is the people who are involved on who owns this, and if you just go like the technology is better, well, that can mean very little. And the other side of it, and I know it's going to sound like a long stretch, but is the patient zero of the housing crisis of 2008. And the reason I say that, I know that sounds like a long stretch, is basically Deutsche Bank was in charge of shorting. They got a guy who said, hey, even though we're really big into the housing market, we picked one guy who's going to short it for us. And he had to come up with a plan to show the value on basically doing everything that the whole industry was not doing, which was, we're going to short the housing market. So we've taken this approach in a sense of looking at, we know we have to show extra value here. We have to take extra attention to showcase something that you may not want to do, or you may not perceive the value in yet. So this actually goes perfectly into what you said, Seth, where we'll put slides together where we actually have a conversation on that risk reward side of thing, where there's extra attention that needs to be put together. There's extra data that needs to show why this is a good focus for you. Like, what are you actually doing now you're not aware of how many hours you're putting in? But we're really focusing a big time on and it's Deutsche Bank, actually, not the other one, but really looking at what's going on in excuse me, really showcasing the value and actually putting together dedicated time.
Yeah, and again, I think what you're speaking there, Joe, Tommy, is that value proposition, right? Is the pain of going through a change more or less than the value you're going to get out of it? And I think a lot of this is executives need to weigh in. Is it strategically in the direction they want to be? Do they want to continue to lead? And I think the argument is very clear. I love your idea, Seth, of pushing for the rewards. I thought it was a good opportunity to like, okay, risk and rewards on this one, and going heavier on, okay, our current process, right? Very few risks because it kind of just does its thing, but there, it's a little bit broken, doesn't work all the time. And by the way, when Tommy gets a promotion, who's going to run the process? Who's going to do the thing now moving forward? So
all the things, yep.
Do we have it documented well enough? Those are the kind of things that I think come up in those conversations that say, no, that is a risk. Oh, we do want Tommy to do other things and just be spending his time chewing through data all the time. Now let's really focus on, okay, what do these new tools provide us and how can we better automate? And that's one of the big stories I use every time I talk about Power BI is automate, automate, automate. That's the story here. But there's a lot of automation that can take over that helps move this on very well. Excellent. Well, that, I think, any other thoughts from Tommy's kind of center of the excellence question? All right. Getting to move on, look from both Tommy and Seth. All right, let's go on to the main question. So Seth, I'll kick it over to you for our main topic today, talking about, overcoming challenges in the community of excellence and rolling out to your organization. Take it away, Seth.
Well, for all of those who were looking forward to me reading documentation for pages on pages, that probably won't happen. This mailbag, this is lengthy. So sit back and enjoy the story of the mailbag question. It's a good one, though, so we decided to read through the entire thing. Hey, guys. I've been listening to and re-listening to episode 277, Power BI Implementation Tuesday Strategic Planning, for the past couple of days, and I have some questions. The problem. The CoE I lead did a big Power BI rollout in January of this year. It led to a deluge of requests for support, engagement, etc., that we do not have the manpower to effectively support. This has led to a general breakdown in support and trust from our executive sponsors, who see the CoE, especially the infrastructure components, gateway server management, capacity planning, is not meeting expectations. Some context. We have a very, very disengaged executive sponsor team, unless there is a problem that they perceive as critical that we are not solving. These include data connectivity, firewall issues that are under the control of entirely different teams, not the CoE. Our exec sponsor previously led a Power BI CoE, but has not given us guidance on running and deploying the CoE. We've been asking him for support since September of last year. Today, 6/20, is the first time I will actually be able to speak with him one-on-one. Second bullet. There is a conflict over CoE ownership between myself and 2 other individuals who support the platform. I don't necessarily care about ownership. I just want the CoE to be successful. That said, leadership has never communicated to our group as a whole the delegation of authority. Bullet 3. We've developed RACI charts, goals, vision, etc., but we do not hear feedback on these items from our exec sponsor until months after they've been written. Our user base has been developing reports since March of last year. CoE was founded later. There are entrenched bad practices, especially when it comes to data modeling. Far too many reports are using many-to-many relationships in their models, do not adhere to star snowflake schemas, and have an over-reliance on big, wide tables. What we, the CoE, do. End user support, connections, DAC support, gateway troubleshooting, error review, training and ticketing. Bullet 2, onboarding and training. Bullet 3, capacity maintenance and management. Bullet 4, gateway server maintenance, log reviews, etc. Bullet 5, platform observability via Power BI APIs. Bullet 6, portal support and development. We both have SharePoint site where we publish connection chain guidance, information about best practices, RE, data modeling, DAX, etc., and more, as well as dedicated Teams channel where users post questions and we post updates. I guess what I want to know is, how do we come back from this? We did a rollout. We have a huge, engaged, and very appreciative, regardless of what the exec sponsorship perceives, audience. This is backed by survey data, community callouts, and awards, and we support 1,700 reports. Nobody is dedicated to the CoE full-time. Although I spend an average of 35 hours a week supporting it, as well as 20 to 30 for my day job, as does another employee. I heard all of the nightmare scenarios in the call, but would love to hear if you have guidance for a resolution. Appreciate any insights, links, thoughts, etc. Thank you guys for everything you're doing.
This was an amazing question. Wow. So first off, there was no name left. So thank you, anonymous user, for sending us this incredible, well thought out, very well articulated question. Looking forward to getting into this one deeper. There's a lot to unpack here.
So if you told me, or you asked me, hey, Tommy, you've done some adoption projects before, what would be the keys to failure? And without even looking at this mailbag, well, I'll go, well, a disengaged executive sponsor, conflict with CoE, bad feedback, and bad data. And that's exactly what this mailbag says. So unfortunately, what our mailbag user is putting together is really the recipe for failure. It's all the things that you would not want, or would really be a catalyst for things to go bad, and go bad quickly.
I would say, maybe you're using language that I think is a bit harsh in this situation.
Yep.
From my perspective.
Am I already doing the hot take?
No, you're just being really critical.
No, I would
really though. I don't know about that.
Well, the way I read this, there's a lot of things going well, but it feels like the center of excellence, and particularly this gentleman and the other gentleman on their CoE, is carrying a lot of the load and acting as if they are more of the executive leaders on the part of the project. And there are some things that are here that are, so let me give you some more. I'm going to read into a couple details inside this that may be insightful as to what we're kind of seeing here as well. When we talk about implementation and rolling out, when you go through, so we went through the whole series around the implementation planning and strategy, and so you have the strategic plan, what we're going to do. What's the tactical planning? How do we get into the solution planning now? There always seems to be this area of, if we open the floodgates too early, which it sounds like here this has done this, everyone likes the tool, People are able to build what they want to build. They're able to get stuff done that they need to. And what has happened is we've had a proliferation. Again, they've been building reports way earlier than the Center of Excellence was established. So there was no rules, no governance, less control at the admin portal. So, imagine opening up your whole company to everyone makes workspaces and everyone makes data and everyone builds reports. This happens. This is a bottom-up approach. This is starting from the business and saying, here's a tool that you can use. They figure it out and get better from there. So how do you rein in? How do you start controlling something that kind of came that started with no control? And to be honest, I think this was part of Microsoft's plan, or at least inadvertently, this was part of their plan. The plan from Microsoft is everyone does analytics. Everyone gets value from Power BI. This is why the Power BI Pro license is attached at an E5 level. By default, it turns on. You just navigate to the website. It works. You can build what you need to build. From Microsoft's standpoint, it makes a ton of sense, right? That is the message. That's the right message. So I feel like what has happened in this organization, and this is maybe my perception, is you think about all the reports that could be created. They may not be super quality. They may not be super, from the Center of Excellence. I feel like there's a portion of this that says, okay, look, there may be a bunch of models and things that are sitting around the surface that are not using best practices. They're bidirectional relationships. The DAX is inefficient. It's not as fast as it should be. However, there should be some things in this pool of information that the organization is building that are more important than others. There's got to be some opportunities where we see the same team pulling the same data multiple times. At 1,700 users, I guarantee you this is happening at some parts across the organization. So what I think the CoE should be doing, I think a lot of the things they're building and they're talking about already are good. They're good engagements. I would maybe look forward to trying to tie more of my executive level OKRs down to what we're doing at the Center of Excellence level and communicating, okay, strategically, what are the company goals that the company has? And in this gentleman and his other partner or, co-lead or whatever they're doing, right? When they're spending 35 hours a week between the two of them, I would try to align those goals back up to main level company objectives and be very clear about that. And even if the executives aren't that engaged, I would at minimum start, me personally, I would regularly, weekly or something, have a bit of an email, a message, a report, a something that I can just regularly push towards them. I think executives are not necessarily always concerned with this data stuff and how this is all working and how it's growing in the organization. They just want to know that, are we meeting our business needs with data? And so if you can continually, regularly pushing back things up, my opinion here is I think there's also an opportunity here to build a larger roadmap, right? You're in the Center of Excellence. You know what you're doing. You know what's working. You know what's not working. You should be picking out data sources or things that should be common. You should be picking up bigger projects that last potentially quarters long and saying, hey, we're going to work on this major initiative to do XYZ thing. We're going to start whatever that thing is. Pick the things you think are going to be most impactful for your business and start there. Communicate it upstream and then work on it from there. So that's kind of how I would approach it.
Yeah, sure.
There's probably a million other things we can do here too.
Yeah, but you're almost too far past that, right? Like you've opened the floodgates to the organization.
True.
As a support center. So you're like, depending on what the day job is, maybe he's already doing that, he or she, the person.
Yep.
So that's a potential challenge point to me, right? Like we're already out of time. Right? Because I think some of the things that stand out to me, and I'm going to probably preface the feedback in this conversation to what am I seeing? What would I recommend for others who have not found themselves in this position? And then I think some potential ideas of, how to not necessarily get your way out of this, but help solve it. So things that stand out. The first thing that stands out is that whoever the author is has a lot of passion. Like it is driving this initiative from the bottom up. And that is the most difficult way to make change in an organization, especially when you start throwing out the names like Center of Excellence. The other glaring thing that I think is the reason why all of the other things are such challenges is you don't have an executive sponsor, right? You have someone who said, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. It sounds like a fantastic idea. Like, yep, solve that business problem, and then walked away. That's not an executive sponsor, because an executive sponsor does things that are outlined here as pain points, right? Who's providing overall guidance? Who's assigning ownership of particular things within the organization? There should not be infighting in a CoE, right? Like there should, and you absolutely could have people who are, he or she outlines 2 other individuals, right? So you got 3 people in this realm. There should be clear roles and responsibilities of these individuals, who owns overall, guidance, who owns overall CoE, who's doing what, and that can only come from the executive level. So in some respects, it's the other byproduct of this is it reads as if the idea was accepted without any of the staffing, right? So what you've done is open the doors to solving all of the problems across the board without aligning that to the actual needs that are going to be a byproduct of opening that door.
Can I jump in? I love that point you make there, Seth, and the lack of. I know you have probably more. I just want to jump on your lack of executive sponsor here, and I'm googling or going back to the strategic implementation planning strategy, and I like the phrase that Microsoft. I just want to point in here. In Microsoft's documentation, the executive sponsor typically provides top-down objectives to support the working team, including funding, right? So they're paying for someone's salary to some degree to kind of own the center of excellence part. These 2 things seem, based on this conversation that I'm hearing here, sounds like they're a bit in conflict, right? You have a day job that you're doing something for support, maybe your IT, and then you're also supporting the CoE. That's also a lot of your job. So you're working more hours per week to kind of keep both things running. The one I would like to kind of point out here is it sounds like there potentially is many executive sponsors in this organization, and no one person is taking kind of lead or point on this to take ownership of that. And I think you're right, Seth. I think this is a lot of these problems are potentially stemming from someone at the executive level top needs to say, these are our objectives. We're going to do these big thinking goals for data stuff. We need to make those our North Star, our direction, where we're going to go. And then the team can start falling a little bit more in line. And then with that commitment is, if people aren't falling in line, executive sponsor steps in and says, look, I'll go talk to these other executive leaders in different teams and say, look, we're trying to do a thing here. If you want to play ball with us, this is how we're going to have to play ball.
So I find it interesting where, Mike, you disagreed with me, but I don't know if you actually refuted what I said. And I want to make sure I didn't say this is a failure, I'm saying this is a recipe for a failure.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah, and I think
I just thought it was just a bit harsh. I think I would just soften my blow a bit. That's the only thing I would say.
Because and I agree. And Tommy, only to interject, only because when you open the doors to the organization, or if the organization is already developing self-service without guidance, right? That's a beast, man. It is, you never know what direction that's going to go in. And this is a state of things are getting out of control. So to be super harsh and critical about it, there's a little pushback.
I'll rephrase it. I mean, but that's kind of our thing. A little personality thing there, though, too, kind of thing. Let me rephrase it. If this trend continues, it's going to be very hard for this to find success. Does that sound better to you? Because we're on the
right track.
Okay, but again, I still would stick with my first phrase, though, because you're talking about a lack of executive sponsorship, which we have said many times before. You don't have that, you're not going to succeed, or you're not going to do well. You're already dealing with bad data models. You have a guy who's a person who's going to deal with burnout very soon, and they have no dedicated BI people. They're all part-time, and you're dealing with this much support. I'm sorry. I am not. I'm going to stand by what I said, or who would I be if I didn't stand by what I said? Because you're dealing with the things that are most critical for adoption.
And the reason I think maybe why I'm pushing back just a slightly bit on your phrase there, right? I think that there is this idea of, I think we all would agree that some of the major milestones or some of the major rocks that need to be moved in an organization are at this very large centralizing, shared services kind of area. I'm not sure all businesses are equipped in strength well enough to really get their heads around what this looks like. And so I do think there are businesses out there that are doing like pockets of analytics, and it's more about, so think about like, the center of excellence is like, here's big conversations that we're having about data that we're going to be utilizing throughout the entire organization. We're going to be kind of the central body, and then we're going to just give out access to other people. I think a lot of times you can run your business, and I think I've seen this as well, where certain teams just decide they're going to handle things the way they're going to handle them, right? The IT team is only there to enable and give access to Power BI. That's all they're trying to do, and that's actually all they want to own. There does not want to be an initiative of that team being a center of excellence. So I feel like in some cases here, again, this is where I'm going to go back a little bit to like, I'm going to make the argument for a business-led, bottom-up approach growth of Power BI. And so there may not be a unified strategy around some of the central data sources. There may not be a unified strategy around, making common things or common elements that are reused across departments. It may turn into each department kind of doing their own thing.
Sure.
Personally, I would like to not agree with that. I'd like to have more companies communicate and work well together across the different teams. But I fully well know certain teams are going to be more analytically there than other teams, and they're going to build better models. They're going to get through harder challenges, and this is potentially a trade-off in the business, right? The business may trade off, hey, we're going to spend a little bit more money on our people, our things, because we're going to spend more on premium, but we're not going to have the most optimized models in the world. Like, right? That's a fair trade-off, because you can be a bit more abusive with the models. Tabular models are incredibly fast. And so because they're so stinking fast, you don't need to have the most optimized everything to make it give you results. And so what I feel like is there may be pockets of teams and departments that are going to be more analytically savvy and getting things done. Hopefully, what I would see here is the success of those teams, the wins of those teams, as they get further down the road here, I hope that they're more prepared for things like Fabric, better automation, thinking about things like analytics and AI, like more advanced feature sets. And so you can use that as an example to then make the case of, hey, this finance department is just crushing it. They've got these great processes. They've built their own kind of mini community of practice, center of excellence around their team. Let's rinse, wash, and repeat that, and let's spend the money to bring that data culture from that department to other parts of the business. Oh, and by the way, we're going to put a re-emphasis on a better center of excellence to help this. We've done something that works well in this one department. Let's try and spread it across other departments. So to be very clear, I'm pushing for that central BI team. I'm pushing for the CoE. Yeah. I fully realize if we don't get that level of adoption at the highest level, maybe at the departmental level, we can get departments to kind of adhere to this a little bit, and you get a department sponsor and they figure out what works well for them.
Yeah. I guess to Tommy, right? Like it's still harsh from my perspective, because it's really easy to judge an outcome. It is much, much harder, especially with larger organizations, to navigate the culture of an organization, adapt to all of the self-service tooling implementation, people, priorities, and push for strategic changes, which a CoE is fundamentally a strategic change to try to elevate an organization. And that is, if it was easy, there wouldn't be, 10 pages of implementation documentation. There wouldn't be entire classes that Mike can teach and do trainings on. And he wouldn't have people coming all the time going, how do you guys handle this? How do you guys handle this? Yeah. So to make carte blanche statements is very easy, and I'm not going to go in on you, but like speaks to, it's really easy to look at a situation and be critical of somebody. or say like, hey, what you should do is this, without the context of a lot of those other things.
1,000%. So if I were to say how, go ahead, Mike.
I'm going to tease on one more thing. I like your point, Seth. And before we move on to the next point, I was actually thinking about this as well. This, I think, slightly changes depending on how the size of your data is. And let me give you some context. You can put a lot of data in a 1 gigabyte tabular model. If your company doesn't deal with a large amount of data, there's not a volume issue here. I've seen entire companies put all their sales data for all history into one tabular model.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm saying this is because there's a difference between I can fit all my data into a 1 gigabyte model or less, because that means a pro license can be used for every single use case in your business. And that's an entirely different plan. And that's an entirely, like, if you imagine it's the control part, right? If everyone can do all their data needs inside tabular models that are under 1 gigabyte, pro licenses are the way to go, because you can build as many models you need. They can be not nearly as performant as you want. You're not spending any more money for poor performance on those models, other than the fact that you're having people wait longer for results to be returned. So to me, there's also potentially a threshold point here too. If this company has 1,700 users and everyone's able to get the data out under that threshold, or build lots of models that support the 1 gig or less size, you don't need to start thinking about larger central models that would then require a bit more engagement from that center of excellence. So there's potentially even a need here around the volume of data you're dealing with. And if it's not that big and you're just trying to build reports, I think that also impacts some of this decision on how much you need to engage.
I agree, but at the same time, like, if this individual and one other half time are supporting 1,700 reports.
That's a lot of reports.
That's nuts.
So even if you have the data, you still have the lack of resources, and I think that's a huge part here. Yeah. So to me, and I feel like I agree, that's a great solution, but I feel that's kind of building the deck without having the foundation for the house. And to me, again, without trying to say and I'm not saying either the only way this works is the ideal approach. That obviously we know, both from experience, that's not the case. But you have to start somewhere if you're going to turn this around. And it's not, we're going to just hire 10 people. Well, this probably starts with the goals, right? You're already into it. To Seth's point, we have gone past a point of no return to some degree. We have rolled this out. People are expecting this. We're not just going to turn it off or start over. We can't do that. So we have to deal with the cards that we're given. So it starts with, you have to have a dialogue and a somewhat consistent dialogue with an executive sponsor and the CoE. And you have to at least start with, okay, do we have our goals, our long-term goals and our short-term goals for what this is going to be for the organization? I don't think you can really get the right resources without that. You're not going to get the data or the dedicated time to fix those data problems without that. So right now, if I were this person and we're looking at everything and what the CoE is already doing and the burnout that probably already is already being felt by this person and others, you have to begin that conversation with the CoE or find that dedicated person and at least start with, can we have a conversation about what's the goal? What does success look like for having Power BI or having business intelligence at our org for these 1,700 people? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for the organization? And I feel like everything right now is more permanent than ever to have that.
I mean, easy to say those things. I think the challenge point, even to Mike previously, is like you reference OKRs, and I think tons of organizations do not have these. And I would, if I'm going to infer, I don't think this organization does either.
Yeah.
If they do, then somehow it reads like the supposed executive sponsor was not aligned to a major objective revolving around the CoE and the organization, which would be astounding to me if you're going to open that door to not have that as an objective, or for the executive sponsor, which should filter down to the person who's pushing up and actually doing all the work here, because it doesn't seem like it's the objective of the sponsor, because they're not engaged, they're not helping, they're not assisting, so they don't have any skin in the game. is what it reads like. You need buy-in, right? And I think that's what you're talking about, Tommy.
Exactly, 1,000%.
I like your point there, Seth, around the OKRs, because there's in here in reading through this, there's a lack of a couple phrases or terms I'm looking for, right? Your OKR, even just talking about there's no language in this question around the company has established these objectives are critical. And I think honestly, if we step back and said, hey, let's go talk to any of those executive leaders and say, look, we think analytics is strategic to the decision making in our business, they would agree. We think that having a department, a team, a support a mechanism around our teams using analytics is important. I think we would agree. So I think there's this idea of there's probably an unwritten, or they don't have a clear objective of all those OKRs at the organization level, because I think any business you talk to at that leadership level would always assume we've got to get better at data. We've got to get more of it. We've got to have our people be equipped enough to be able to handle that data and make decisions on it. We've got to be able to trust it. All of those conversations at the very highest level, I think, make sense. And I think tying back what we're missing here in the Center of Excellence is we don't have a dedicated user running the CoE, even just one person. There should be a minimum of one person, I think, in this organization to just say, you're the guy. We're going to shed the other responsibilities from you. Let's move them to other people in the organization. And because you're already spending 35 hours a week kind of executing on this, okay, you're dedicated. This is your job.
And like that is an interesting one. And I'd like it'd be good to get your feedback too here though, Mike. Is it depends. Is there a dependence on what type of CoE is it? Is it because a CoE in many respects just can be the central BI team with added responsibility, right? In terms of data management, governance, it interjects and opens above and beyond just business intelligence. So are you opening that door to you already have a team, you're adding to it? Or was this hey, we do these things, but we're also going to tack it on, but we're kind of assuming those responsibilities without the additional staffing, kind of thing?
Right.
How do you usually see a CoE set up? Mike,
how do I usually
just a performance body? Is it a shared resource across multiple different units that are talking about data governance, that are doing data management across the ecosystem, that are creating standards? Because you can run things like that. That's more of a governing, as opposed to diving into the support aspects, because that could just be hey, you're business intelligence. You're part of the action arm of a CoE.
Yes. So I will say I've seen it multiple ways in organizations, and I feel like I've seen in smaller organizations, it almost kind of grows a little bit more organically. There is that one individual that finds values from wins with doing things with data. Sure. Where I feel like those one individuals make a lot of successes, those individuals build specific reports for the executives to make decisions. So when the Center of Excellence kind of really fundamentally shifts here is that one individual or those narrow group of individuals that are serving the data to the executive leadership. Executives are going to ask questions. How's our revenue? What's the best health of the business? There's some main questions that are occurring here that are getting pushed down to a person or teams. In smaller organizations, that falls on one person. That person typically globs onto Power BI. They become the report server to the executives, and they are then challenged with, how do I roll this out to more parts of the organization? And then they start exploring, getting feedback, getting help. And at some point, I think there's a moment here where that individual stops doing as much of their other roles or jobs and becomes more of that Center of Excellence leader and corresponding directly with executive leadership to make sure that they get the data they need.
Right.
But that's to me, so what you're defining to me is I guess an evolution of how business intelligence and reporting can open the doors, but the CoE is strategic.
Yeah, it's not just support,
but that's just in smaller organizations. I think in larger organizations it changes. There is a dedicated CoE team, and I think that comes more out of the IT organization.
That might just be a semantics thing. I would say you don't have a CoE at that level. Then.
Yeah, because what I've seen the most successful is the higher level of the CoE. They actually have authority to make decisions, and it's not just everything I'm seeing, at least in the mailbag, where it's end user support, onboarding, and training. That's all great, but to Seth's point, it is strategic, where it's also it can make decisions, and it has the authority to do so, to modify or change things based on end user needs, but also the resources. Like, we either need these resources, we're only going to do things a certain way.
That you're making these declarative statements like the CoE has power, and they don't.
In this example, they don't.
Unless it's
in this example, sure. Yeah. Okay. Fine. In this example, they don't. I'm telling you what I've seen is a successful one.
Okay.
So,
I mean, I think they do make statements, but who enforces this in this world, right? A lot of what the CoE does listed here in this question was end user support, helping people, which is great. Onboarding and training, good. We're letting people get into the program and utilizing things.
Training and support bucket.
Yep. Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of maintenance, right?
Performance.
Are the logs on? Support. Something falls down. Like they're doing what they're doing. What I would say is these are a lot of the, aside from the end user support and maybe the onboard and training, those are the two things I would maybe say are kind of purely CoE related activities, because that's about educating and grooming talent across the organization. Everything else feels like an IT ticket to me. So it feels like this is not actually a center of excellence. This is a ticket IT based team that's supporting needs from the business without much direction.
IT with data. So
yeah.
And so I think what you're right there, Seth, is things that a language I would like to see in here would be, what does the CoE do? The CoE does quarterly key project building. It does strategic reviews of existing data assets and decides project planning for quarterly objectives. And it sets a plan, it prioritizes the work, and it works towards that end and reports that back up to leadership. So to me, that's what I'm thinking. I mean, that's the part that's missing in this CoE that I think is needed. And potentially because if I read a little bit more between the words here, the reason the CoE is not getting the love that it needs is potentially because executive leadership looks at them, that's the ticketing team. Send them a ticket, do the thing. Well, and they're not thinking of them as strategically moving the business forward. It's thinking of them, we have problems. You're the team to solve those problems. Get them off my plate. You just own it. That's your job.
Yeah. Or it was the plan, and the deluge of support has now consumed all of the time to do all the things, and they're just swamped, which will kill those long-term things, especially if it's trying to dig your way out of this unexpected thing and trying to move towards those directions.
Yeah.
Either way, a couple things I want to note as far as like ideas potentially to help get out of this situation, or just let it die a fiery death, because ultimately, like, I have seen many people within organizations go out too fast and they burn out. And what'll happen is you hit the large audience of the organization hard. A lot of messaging, a lot of announcements, a lot of updates, a lot of meetings, a lot of invites, a lot of like, here's how to do things, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden one day it just dies. It stops because either you didn't get engaged, the audience didn't engage with you, right? Or you opened a door and you couldn't support it. And all of a sudden you disappear off the face of the earth because you're no longer able to do those, kind of keep engaged audience as a leader, as a whatever, because now you have, to Mike's point, you're just in support hell. So I guess my points would be this. Identify and point out the failures that are happening in this support area and point them to the lack of staffing, right? And one of the things I think, especially in this realm, is developing KPIs or metrics that identify and outline that particular struggle area, or like where it sounds like executives are pointing at failure, and make agreements and say, okay, well, what is an acceptable number here? I will push it and fix it with X resource. I staff me to do this thing, and I will turn this around to solve that problem. Because if it all of a sudden is like what I think has happened here is the organization itself started to use self-service. There's the idea of a CoE, an idea, which I think we pointed out as the problem. It got traction enough to have an executive say, "Oh, that sounds like a great idea." They said yes without any skin in the game, and you went for it, and that's great. But you need to roll those things into great. Well, we all see the problems now, and those problems don't stem from lack of vision. They don't stem from people not wanting to do things. It stems from there's not enough resources that are dedicated to solve these problems, and we opened a door as an organization, and either we are going to close it or we're going to support the flood, right? And I think redirecting to the areas where it sounds like staffing is needed is absolutely something that should be done, because you need to get out of an expectation that, like, oh, you can just handle this all, right? Oh, you just became a support team too. Like, whoa, we did not sign up for that. We signed up for the CoE. There's this area we did not see, right? And now we need to collectively as an organization solve that problem. So part of that, I think, comes with the hardest part of this, and hopefully in the meeting you were able to do this, but it's pushed for shared ownership. Like, either this executive sponsor wants to see this succeed and has skin in the game, or you get some sort of buy-in and shared ownership of the success of this because they said yes, right? And what I fear and I hope didn't happen is somebody was just like, oh yeah, that sounds like a great idea, run with it, and if it fails, it's on you, because it doesn't matter to me. But you're gonna solve something for the business, and I'm not, like, there's no additional budget, there's no additional anything for me to actually impact me as an executive sponsor.
So I really like that you did. You mentioned pain points, because pain points are such a great way to easily become a goal if you don't have goals or anything set. Something that I've seen before is, this person's probably pretty involved with, knows the stakeholders on other departments, knows the people, like they're higher up on the sales team, marketing team, or requesting reports. Start getting the feedback. If you don't have any feedback on pain points, or you don't have any feedback on what the goals are, what are teams struggling with? Hey, director of sales, we're working together a lot. What does your team feel are the biggest pain points with getting their data? Start writing these down. That's what you bring to your executive sponsor or the person who's tied to that budget. That becomes all of a sudden this list of, look, we're seeing, it's not just me saying these were the pain points. It's not just me saying I'm having burnout. People are already expecting a lot and they're not getting it in time. And this is across the board. So these are our biggest pain points. Now, executive sponsors, whoever's tied to the business intelligence budget or the Power BI budget, here's what we've identified. Let's prioritize them. If they're willing to do that or have that conversation, all of a sudden you have yourself some goals. And if one of the biggest one is lack of getting responses back or getting reports back in a timely fashion, okay, that's easily found that resources are one of the biggest things. You're not going to get the resources, I think, unless you actually, to one of our phrases, show the value. But I would start with just getting feedback from teams who are already seeing the frustration and saying, we're going to work together here. You tell me what you're frustrated with. Yep. I'm going to bring this back to who's in charge of this or my executive sponsor. And this is where we're going to start. And you'll see authority becomes one of them. Who's in charge of this, the resources, getting the data right. Hearing from the team is going to be more, or from the organization is going to be more powerful than you just coming to the executive sponsor with your perceptions at this point.
I'm going to kind of maybe wrap here with a little bit of starting the final thoughts here going here as well. So, Seth, do you have one more point before you want to go to like last thoughts here?
No, I just have a final overall thought in the whole thing.
Okay. So I'm going to love this discussion. I think this is very, very pertinent. Question was amazing. This is like really causing me to think deeply around how does this work in the organization? Where is the gaps that we're seeing here? A couple thoughts or actions that maybe come to mind as I'm giving my final thoughts here. Supporting 1,700 reports is insanely a large amount of reports you're trying to support. That's a lot of reporting. Are all of those regularly being used? Is there an ability to deprecate or move some of them off of your plate by saying these are no longer being utilized? We're going to turn them off and we're going to delegate that. The other thought here I'm thinking is there's no mention of a Power BI champion, and there's no mention really around the community of practice either. So I was thinking about how do we tamp down some more and basically offload some more of these very technical supporting tickets to experts in departments. I have to imagine if you're the only team that's doing this, again, depending on what your culture is in your company, some data cultures and some companies there is no self-service. Self-service is I fill out a ticket, it goes to a central team, they build me the report, and then it goes back to the users. I think there is an ability here to make an opportunity around equipping department leads or equipping people in departments to become that support center person, right? Identifying who they are, spend additional time with individuals that are really just crushing it in their department. And then when people or requests come in, say, hey, this request came in, this report's broken. Hey, the department lead for you is this person. Well, let me offload some of that to them. And so I think the idea here is I don't want the center of excellence to be like a pure ticketing system. I don't think that's a very good use of your center of excellence, is to make them pure tickets. I think it's better to move them more towards strategic movements, planning, education, and trying to push that self-service role out to the broader part of the organization. So those are maybe a couple of my thoughts here. Try to get full funding for a full center of excellence person. Center of excellence should be federated and engaging across multiple business units. There should be representatives from each business unit be able to communicate what their challenges are. And then you should be able to build policy, and you should be able to work with those departments to build Power BI champions in each of those groups to help service and offload some of that additional central request and central pain. And that's maybe where I would kind of go with some of that. Using that all of the information to go back to, okay, this is how we're aligning to your OKRs for the top of the organization. And just communicate it and see what happens. Seth, do you want to do some final thoughts as well?
And I feel for this person. It's a tough spot to be in, and there are paths out, but it's more challenging because negative sentiment around unrealistic expectations is a real thing. Regardless, it's across the spectrum, not just business intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my final thought are some ideas for others who have yet to go on the journey a little bit, and potentially, for this person. Well, so for those who have not started, right, listen to all of the implementation episodes. It's not just one thing. Read through all of the documentation and get the whole scope in your head before you start taking actions, would be my first point. Part of a plan, when you're getting this in your head and laying out the strategy to engage with an executive sponsor, needs to be how you plan on staffing it. Part of the plan is setting up infrastructure, whether that's tools and technology, implementation with the organization. How are you going to engage? And everybody has to expect that you are going to adapt as you go, because your organization is not like every other organization. It's going to be different. It's going to have different needs. Planning includes milestones and objectives. It includes owners, commitments, and skin in the game from the top down, because that's how you start to avoid complete lack of engagement from certain areas, because there's agreement across the board. And finally, I would say, like, you're not going to get everything perfect in your head. A great way to do this is to sell it by a particular business area or a smaller group of people. So start small, because you're going to learn the pain points. You're going to learn what things you've missed in your plan. You're going to learn how to scale up, and you can grow into a solution, create buzz, create positive feedback, right, from what you're doing. And then that adds to the strength of the argument, where you now have internal data that shows to executives and others that there is a cost to this, right? There is a value to what you're doing, hopefully in the byproducts of what that team is able to accomplish, the insights, keep on track of like how the benefit of engaging in these things with that business unit is changing the organization. And then you can equate that to cost. And either that's a time cost or a resource addition cost, because the value the organization is seen at the time. So like it's tough. All of this is very complex. There's a lot of mix and mash of strategy, engaging with many different people, changing processes. And if you do it too fast, sometimes you find yourself in this state where you overcommitted and you can't support it. And that's a hard place to come back from, because depending on what was pitched, could have been the right idea, could have been the right plan. But if you miss any parts of these, things can go off the rails. And when they do, it's a real challenge to get it back on track, because the optics aren't just you and an executive leader or you and a smaller group of people. It's the entire organization. And that's a hard thing to sway. So good luck to you.
Tommy, any final thoughts?
I feel like I've said all my hot takes and thoughts, but no, I would say that, like I said, the biggest thing is there are some foundational attributes that you can apply regardless of where you're at. It doesn't mean you have to always start at the beginning. And I'll just mention, really, I think the two is setting up those goals. And if you need to get those from the pain points, I'll reiterate that that's a great place to start. If you're hearing, or you can get the actual data of where frustrations are, it's a great place where someone's going to start listening, because someone else is tied to the budget there. And then it's really, I think, to your point, mailbag person, is get that authority, and whether it's you or another person, on those roles and responsibilities. Those are literally the two critical aspects of the beginning of implementation planning, is our goals and our roles and responsibilities. Obviously, to everyone's point, there's a ton other things out there, but to me, that's the foundation. That's the base of whatever else you're going to do. Resources, good data, right people. It starts with your roles and responsibilities. Who's doing what? Who's in charge of what? And what are we actually aiming for?
I like it. Excellent. Very good conversation. I really like this topic today. Thank you very much for the question. This was really good conversation. I think we could talk about this one for at least another episode and keep going down this rabbit hole. But anyways, thank you very much. We appreciate your time. If you found this conversation insightful, if you found that this resonates with your organization around a lack of engagement, there's lack of direction from your center of excellence, hopefully there's a couple things here at the end of, planning, being strategic, and getting that engagement that you need to the executive level leadership, so you can really be successful in winning here. So hopefully there's a couple nuggets, observations here that maybe you could take away from this and leverage inside your business. With that being said, please, if you don't mind, if you like this topic and you think someone else should hear it, please share it with somebody else. That's the only way we promote this. We just do it by word of mouth and people who like engaging with this kind of content. Tommy, where else can you find the podcast?
You can find us on Apple and Spotify, or wherever your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. We're doing a lot more mailbags. You can tell today's one of those days. And if you have an idea, a question, or a topic that you want us to talk about on a future episode, head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name so we can give you the right accolades and praise and whatever those things may be. And obviously a great question. Join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. and join the conversation on all powerbi.tips social media channels.
Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.